Please be seated. I came to bring fire to the earth, and how I wish it were already kindled. Do you think I have come to bring peace to the earth? No, I tell you, but rather division. These are difficult words to hear Jesus say, especially in this very divided moment in our country. Our scripture text today seems to contradict Jesus' other teachings, as well as the whole message of Luke's gospel. Luke is the evangelist who gives us the angels proclaiming peace on earth at Jesus' birth. At the very beginning, chapter 1, verse 79, Luke says, Jesus will guide our feet into the way of peace. We know him as the Prince of Peace, and his mission here on earth, one of divine peace and reconciliation. Why then does he declare here that he has come to bring fire and division? Wasn't it only a few short weeks ago that he rebuked James and John, the sons of thunder, for suggesting something very similar about the Samaritans? What are we to make of this very confusing passage? Let's start with his statement about fire. The image of hellfire and brimstone has been used in some faith traditions to use fear to coerce people into obedience. Jesus is not doing that here. Consider the fire of Pentecost as he sends his Spirit to guide his followers. Presiding Bishop Michael Curry spoke a bit about fire in his sermon for the royal wedding. And we touched on this a couple of weeks ago in our church chat class. Bishop Curry spoke of the discovery and harnessing of fire as one of the greatest advances in all of human history. He explained how the discovery of fire helped make human civilization possible. Fire cleanses and purifies. It reduces disease and creates more sanitary conditions. Fire warms, enabling people to move into colder regions. And fire transforms, changing the properties of metals and materials, allowing people to create all manner of tools and inventions. Bishop Curry said in our own time, controlling fire makes jet engines and space travel possible, expanding our horizons further than humans have ever imagined. Our ability to use fire lifts and advances every person on the planet. He said, if humanity ever harnesses the energy of love, it will be the second time in history that we have discovered fire. I believe Jesus is saying something very similar to the crowds gathered around him that day. Malachi 3 says, for he is like a refiner's fire and like washer's soap. He will sit as a refiner and purifier of silver, and he will purify the descendants of Levi and refine them like gold and silver until they present offerings to the Lord in righteousness. The refiner's fire burns away those parts of us that are not fruitful and transforms what remains. In contrast, that fire that James and John had in mind for the Samaritans was the fire of incineration, the fire that wipes out enemies, the fire of separation and destruction. Jesus also lived in a very divided and politically charged time. His own country was occupied by foreign soldiers. As Jesus continues his teaching that day, he describes division happening in families. He's not intentionally trying to set people against one another. Instead, he tells the crowd some very difficult truths about how some people will respond to his message. He doesn't try to sugarcoat or hide some of the real-world effects that his ministry will have. In Luke 4:18, remember, when Jesus read from the scroll of Isaiah, he declared his mission to bring good news to the poor, release to the captives, restoration of sight to the blind, and freedom to the oppressed. Not everyone receives this with open arms. What is good news for the marginalized can be a challenge to the powerful. Those who benefit from the labor or oppression of others react with hostility when their influence and status is threatened. New Testament professor Richard Carlson explains it this way. He says, "The divinely wrought peace that Jesus inaugurates and bestows establishes the proper relationship of mercy, compassion, and justice between God and humanity. Not everyone, however, wants or welcomes this divine peace plan. Hence, the initiation of Jesus' peace agenda also triggers contentious disunity and fissures among all facets of society, right down to the societal core of the household." In our own recent history, we can find numerous examples of social justice movements being met with hostility and violence. When you say that every person has dignity, that every person is made in the image of God, it will threaten some people. We could look to the experience of the suffragists in the early 20th century. Women organized for nearly a century, spanning 5 generations, working tirelessly to win their right to vote. As decades passed and their efforts were resisted, they began nonviolent protests. The only violence they incurred was that violence inflicted on them. Every effort was made to crush their effort to have a voice in their own government. The women were arrested, given long prison sentences. They endured draconian treatment designed to force them into silence. Through it all, though, they stood firm, knowing their cause to be just. And then at length, finally, in 1920, the 19th Amendment was ratified, giving them the right to vote. And they were able to take that first step towards gender equality. Or we could look to the good trouble of Congressman John Lewis. As a leader in the civil rights movement, he participated in the Freedom Rides, in the Nashville sit-ins, and the March with Dr. King in Selma. On the day known as Bloody Sunday, Alabama state troopers and police beat him almost to death. This was only one of several occasions where he suffered in this way. On one freedom ride, white onlookers bashed his head in with a milk crate. Years later, in an interview with CNN, Lewis described the incident, telling reporters, "It was very violent. I thought I was going to die. I was left lying at the Greyhound bus station in Montgomery, unconscious." Moving into our own time, we are all witnessing a deeply concerning surge of violent rhetoric, hate crimes, and open hostility towards other people. When Jesus spoke to the crowd that day, he knows the people who follow him will face opposition. For all of us sitting here in this room, followers of Jesus today, this passage offers us the same unvarnished truth. Commentator Debbie Thomas writes, Jesus will name realities we don't want named. He will upset hierarchies we'd rather keep intact. And he will disrupt all dynamics in our relationships with ourselves and with each other that keep us from wholeness and holiness. It's because he knows that real peace is worth fighting for. No one met him without feeling compelled to change. He consistently brought people to the point of crisis, tension, movement, or transformation. Friends, it's time for us to discover fire again. The fire that Jesus kindled on the cross is love. Love of every single person, not this group over that group. You all know John 3:16, for God so loved the world that he gave his only Son. Even when we face resistance, may we stand firm against the hate, injustice, and domination of this world. May God's love guide our feet into the way of